There's a number that affects every single person watching this video right now, whether you know about it or not, whether you care about it or not, whether you live in the United States or anywhere else in the world. This number affects your savings, your job, the prices you pay for food, energy, and housing, the future you're planning for, the retirement you're counting on, the world your children will inherit. That number is $36 trillion. That is the current total national debt of the United States of America. And right now, today, as you watch this video, it is growing faster than ever, adding roughly $1 trillion every 100 days. That's $10 billion per day, $416 million per hour, nearly $7 million per minute. Every minute of every day, the debt clock keeps spinning. Now here's where it gets personal. If you divide that 36 trillion by the number of American citizens, every man, woman, and child in the United States owes approximately $108,000. Your share of a debt you never voted for, never agreed to, never personally spent. And the interest on that debt? The government paid over $1 trillion in interest alone in 2024. For the first time in American history, interest on the national debt exceeded the defense budget, exceeded what we spend on Medicare, exceeded everything except Social Security. We are now in a situation where the fastest growing expense in the entire federal government is the cost of borrowing money we already owe. And almost nobody in mainstream media is explaining what this actually means, what the consequences are, who benefits, who loses, and what you personally can do about it. That's what this video is going to do. So let's start at the beginning. How did we get here? Because this didn't happen overnight. This is the result of decades of decisions. Decisions made by both political parties, by multiple administrations, by Congress after Congress, choosing short-term spending over long-term fiscal responsibility, choosing to borrow rather than tax or cut, choosing to kick the problem down the road until the road ran out. In 1980, the United States national debt was approximately $900 billion, less than $1 trillion. The United States was the world's largest creditor nation. We were owed more money by the rest of the world than we owed them. We had emerged victorious from World War II as the dominant economic and military power. We had built the Bretton Woods system, created the International Monetary Fund, established the dollar as the world's reserve currency. We were at the top of the economic world. Then things changed. The 1980s brought significant tax cuts under President Reagan, combined with significant military spending increases. The theory was that tax cuts would stimulate economic growth so much that revenues would actually increase despite lower rates. It's called supply-side economics, or trickle-down economics, depending on your political perspective. The growth happened, but revenues didn't grow enough to cover the spending, so deficits began accumulating. By 1990, the debt had grown from $900 billion to nearly $3.2 trillion, more than tripled in a decade. In the 1990s, there was actually a brief period of fiscal discipline. Under President Clinton, after a contentious budget deal, the government ran budget surpluses for 4 consecutive years, from 1998 to 2001. The debt growth actually slowed. For a moment, it looked like the problem could be managed. Then 9/11 happened. 2 wars, Afghanistan and Iraq. Both put on the national credit card. No new taxes to fund them, just borrowing. At the same time, the Bush tax cuts reduced revenue, and Medicare Part D, a new drug benefit program, was added without being funded. By 2008, the debt had grown from $5.7 trillion to nearly $10 trillion. Then the financial crisis hit. The government response, stimulus packages, bank bailouts, automatic stabilizers like unemployment insurance, added trillions more. By the time Obama left office, the debt stood at about $20 trillion. Obama doubled the national debt, not entirely from new spending. Much of it was inherited recession spending and interest accumulation, but the number is accurate. Under Trump, before the pandemic, the debt was growing at about $1 trillion per year despite a strong economy. Normally, in a strong economy, you reduce deficits, you pay down debt. That didn't happen. Tax cuts in 2017 reduced revenue, military spending increased. Entitlement spending continued growing, deficits persisted even during prosperity. Then the pandemic hit in 2020. The government response was unprecedented. Multiple stimulus packages, expanded unemployment, business loans through PPP, direct payments to individuals. The Federal Reserve created trillions. By the end of 2020 and into 2021, roughly $6 to $7 trillion in new debt and money creation had been injected into the economy. When Biden took office, the debt was around $27 trillion. By the end of his term in early 2025, it had grown to $36 trillion, nearly $10 trillion in 4 years. So across administrations, across parties, across decades, the story is the same. The debt grew and grew and grew. Now here's the critical question. Why does this matter? Is this just a big number? Is it just politicians being irresponsible with taxpayer money? Or are there real concrete consequences that affect your daily life? There are. And They're happening right now. Let me explain them clearly. Consequence 1, the interest trap. This is the most immediate and dangerous consequence. When you borrow money, you pay interest. Simple enough concept at the personal level. If you have a $30,000 car loan at 5%, you pay $100 per year in interest. But the federal government has $36 trillion in debt. At an average interest rate across all its bonds of around 3 to 4%, the annual interest bill is approximately $1 to $1.5 trillion. And rising. Because as old low-interest bonds mature and get refinanced at today's higher interest rates, the average interest rate on the total debt goes up. By some estimates, interest costs could reach $1.8 to $2 trillion annually within the next few years. Here's why this creates a trap. Every dollar spent on interest is a dollar that can't be spent on anything else. Not roads, not schools, not defense, not healthcare, not research, not the things that actually grow the economy and improve people's lives. It's money that just disappears into payments to bondholders, domestic and foreign. And as interest costs rise, they crowd out productive spending. This is called crowding out. The government borrows so much that it takes up a large portion of available capital, leaving less for private investment, for businesses, for mortgages. This drives up interest rates across the economy, making it more expensive for you to borrow money for a home, a car, a business, your student loans. The government's debt problem becomes your debt problem. Consequence 2, inflation and currency debasement. When the government can't pay its bills through taxation, it has two options: default on the debt, or print money. Printing money, or more accurately, having the Federal Reserve create money to purchase government bonds, is called monetization of the debt, and it creates inflation. Here's how it works. The government issues a bond, the Fed creates money and buys that bond. The government now has new money to spend, but there are more dollars in circulation than before, without a corresponding increase in goods and services. So the existing dollars are worth less. This is inflation. Not the only cause of inflation, but a significant contributing factor. And we saw this play out vividly. After the 2020 stimulus packages and the Fed's quantitative easing programs, inflation hit 9% in 2022, the highest in 40 years. And even as inflation has come down from that peak, it hasn't gone away. Prices are still roughly 20 to 25% higher than they were in early 2020. Your grocery bill, your rent or mortgage payment, your insurance premiums, your utility bills, all significantly higher. And that's not going to reverse. Prices rarely come back down. They just stop going up as fast. So the inflation damage is permanent. And if the government continues borrowing, and the Fed continues accommodating that borrowing through money creation, more inflation is likely coming. The $36 trillion debt is ultimately an inflation time bomb. Because at some point, the options narrow to print or default. And printing is politically easier. Consequence 3, the entitlement cliff. Here's something most people don't understand about the debt problem. It's actually going to get significantly worse in the coming years without any new spending programs, just on autopilot, because of demographics and existing commitments. The baby boom generation, roughly 76 million Americans born between 1946 and 1964, is retiring. About 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every single day in the United States. This is creating an enormous increase in spending on Social Security and Medicare. Social Security is already running deficits, taking in less in payroll taxes than it's paying out in benefits. The trust fund that was built up over decades is being drawn down. By most estimates, if nothing changes, the Social Security Trust Fund runs out sometime in the 2030s. At that point, the program can only pay about 75 to 80% of promised benefits from current tax revenue. Medicare is in even worse shape. Healthcare costs grow faster than general inflation. An aging population uses more healthcare. The combination is devastating for long-term fiscal projections. According to the Congressional Budget Office, even without any new programs, federal spending as a percentage of the economy is projected to grow significantly over the next 30 years, driven almost entirely by Social Security, Medicare, and interest on the debt. The debt problem isn't going away. It's accelerating. Consequence 4, the global confidence problem. The United States has the world's reserve currency. The dollar is used in roughly 60% of global trade transactions. About 60% of foreign exchange reserves worldwide are held in dollars. This gives the United States enormous economic advantages. We can borrow more cheaply than any other country. We can print money with fewer immediate consequences. We can impose economic sanctions because so much global finance runs through dollar-denominated systems. This is called exorbitant privilege. But this privilege depends on confidence, on the world believing that the United States will not default on its debts, that the dollar will maintain its value, that the American economy and institutions are sound. If that confidence erodes, if the world starts to believe that American debt is not safe, that the dollar is not stable, the consequences would be severe. Foreign countries could stop buying or start selling U.S. Treasury bonds. This would force interest rates higher, much higher. The dollar could weaken significantly against other currencies. American consumers would face much higher import prices. The Fed could lose control of monetary conditions. This isn't a theoretical future scenario. It's beginning to happen. We've already discussed in previous videos how China has reduced its treasury holdings by $600 billion, how Japan has reduced holdings, how Saudi Arabia is discussing alternative arrangements. None of these countries are panicking. They're not dumping U.S. bonds all at once. That would hurt them too. They're slowly, carefully, systematically diversifying, reducing dependence on dollar-denominated assets, building alternative systems. This is the gradual erosion of confidence in slow motion. And the $36 trillion debt is a major reason for that erosion. Consequence 5. Political and social instability. Debt and fiscal stress create political pressure. When governments can't pay for what people expect, when services are cut, when taxes are raised, when inflation erodes living standards, people get angry. History shows a fairly consistent pattern. Fiscal stress leads to political polarization. Mainstream parties lose credibility. Extreme parties gain support. Social cohesion breaks down. We're arguably seeing early stages of this. Political polarization in the United States is at historically high levels by most measures. Trust in government institutions is at historic lows. Economic anxiety is high even during periods of nominal economic growth. Why? Because the official numbers don't match lived experience. GDP grows, but the gains go disproportionately to asset owners. Workers see stagnant real wages, rising costs, declining living standards relative to their parents, and the debt is part of why. The interest burden crowds out productive investment. The inflation from debt monetization erodes purchasing power. The fiscal constraints limit government's ability to invest in infrastructure, education, healthcare, the things that support broad-based prosperity. So the debt isn't just an economic problem, it's a social and political problem. Now, here's the question you're probably asking. Can this be fixed? Is there a way out? Let me be honest with you. There's no easy way out. There's no painless solution. Every realistic option involves some combination of pain for some group. Option 1, grow your way out. If the economy grows fast enough, revenues increase, the debt becomes smaller relative to the size of the economy. This happened after World War II. The U.S. had a debt-to-GDP ratio of nearly 120% in 1946. By the 1970s, it had fallen to around 25%. Not because the debt was paid off, but because the economy grew dramatically. Is this possible now? Theoretically, yes. But the growth needed is historically unprecedented, and structural factors including demographics, productivity trends, and competition from China make this very difficult. Option 2, tax your way out. Raise taxes significantly on corporations, on wealthy individuals, on capital gains, on financial transactions. Use the revenue to pay down debt, or at least stop adding to it. Could this work? Raising taxes would help. But the math is difficult. Even aggressive tax increases on the wealthy and corporations wouldn't close the current deficit, let alone pay down existing debt. You'd need either very broad-based tax increases, which are politically very difficult, or you'd need to cut spending significantly as well. Option 3, cut spending, reduce government expenditures significantly, particularly on entitlements like Social Security and Medicare, which are the largest and fastest growing parts of the budget. Could this work? Theoretically, yes. But the politics are nearly impossible. Every single person receiving Social Security and Medicare is a voter. Any politician who talks seriously about cutting these programs faces massive backlash. We've seen this play out repeatedly. Both parties have been unwilling to make serious cuts to entitlement spending. Option 4, inflate your way out. Allow inflation to run higher than usual. Keep interest rates low. Over time, the real value of the debt decreases because you're paying it back with weaker dollars. This is what many analysts believe is the actual policy path being pursued, even if it's not stated explicitly. It's politically easier than taxes or spending cuts. The pain is diffuse, spread across all holders of dollars, hard to trace directly to policy decisions, and it works, in a sense. It reduces the real burden of debt. But the cost falls on savers, on people with fixed incomes, on workers whose wages don't keep up with inflation, on anyone who holds wealth in dollars. It's a hidden transfer of wealth from regular people to debtors, including the federal government. Option 5, restructuring or default. At some extreme point, if the debt becomes truly unsustainable, there could be some form of debt restructuring. This could take many forms: extending maturities, reducing interest rates through negotiation, or in a worst case, outright default on some portion of the debt. This would be catastrophic. It would destroy the United States credit rating, cause massive disruption to global financial markets. The dollar would likely collapse in value, interest rates would spike. This is why it's considered unthinkable, and why other options, even bad ones, are preferred. The most likely path forward is a combination of all of the above: some growth, some tax increases, some spending restraint, significant inflation, and a gradual erosion of the dollar's global role. Death by 1,000 cuts rather than a single catastrophic event. And that's important to understand. The debt crisis probably doesn't look like a single dramatic crash. It probably looks like what we're already experiencing: persistent inflation, declining purchasing power, rising inequality, slower economic growth, gradually rising borrowing costs, slowly eroding living standards for the majority of people while asset owners continue doing well. So what do you do? How do you position yourself personally for this environment? Based on history, based on the patterns we've seen in other countries and other times that faced similar debt problems, a few principles emerge. First, own real assets, not dollars. If the likely outcome is continued inflation and currency debasement, holding wealth in dollars is a losing strategy. Real assets, things with intrinsic value, regardless of what the dollar does, tend to preserve wealth. We've talked about this in previous videos: gold, real estate, productive businesses. These are the assets that survive previous episodes of currency debasement. Second, understand that the official inflation number may understate your actual cost increase. The Consumer Price Index, the main measure of inflation, has been adjusted and revised over the decades in ways that many economists argue systematically undercount real inflation. Housing costs, healthcare costs, and education costs have risen much faster than the official CPI suggests. Your actual cost of living may be increasing faster than official numbers indicate. Third, be cautious with long-term fixed income investments, bonds, CDs, annuities, any investment that promises a fixed nominal return denominated in dollars. In a high inflation environment, these lose real value. A 5% bond return sounds decent, but if real inflation is 5 or 6%, you're actually losing purchasing power. Fourth, consider the geographical diversification of your economic exposure, not necessarily leaving the United States, but understanding that having some exposure to economies and currencies outside the United States may provide diversification benefits if the dollar weakens significantly. Fifth, stay financially educated. The people who navigate financial crises best are the ones who understand what's actually happening, not the simplified media narrative, but the actual mechanisms, the incentives, the historical patterns. This is why channels like this one matter, not to make you paranoid or pessimistic, but to give you the information you need to make informed decisions. The $36 trillion debt is not just an abstract policy problem. It's not just political theater between parties arguing about spending. It's a real, structural, worsening problem that will affect the purchasing power of your savings, the interest rates on your loans, the stability of your retirement, the opportunities available to your children. Understanding it doesn't mean being helpless or hopeless. Many people prospered during every previous period of fiscal stress and currency instability. The ones who understood what was happening, who positioned accordingly, who held real assets, who stayed informed. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it rhymes. And the rhyme pattern here is familiar: too much debt, too much money printing, persistent inflation, gradual currency decline, transfer of wealth from savers to asset owners. The question is which side of that transfer you're on, not as victims of forces beyond your control, but as informed individuals making strategic decisions with the knowledge of what's actually happening. That's what this channel is about: decoding the economic systems that affect your life, explaining the mechanisms behind the headlines, giving you the context and understanding to navigate whatever comes next. If this video helped you understand the $36 trillion debt problem, why it matters personally, and how to think about protecting yourself, subscribe to Decoding the Economy. This is exactly what we do here. Every video goes deeper, explains more, connects more dots. The next video in this series covers the exact timeline, the specific trigger points, what to watch for in 2026 and 2027, the indicators that will tell you when the situation is escalating, when to act, and what actions actually make sense. You need that information. And it's coming next. This is Decoding the Economy, where we reveal what the headlines don't explain. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.